List 5. Assists to remembering. Remember is derived, of course, directly from action in the physical universe. How would a deaf-mute teach a child to remember? It would be necessary for him to keep forcing objects or actions on the child when the child left them alone or omitted them. Although parents are not deaf-mutes, children do not understand languages at very early ages, and as a consequence, learn to remember by having their attention first called toward actions and objects, spaces, and time. It violates the self-determinism of the individual, and therefore his ability to handle himself, to have things forced upon him without his agreement. This could be said to account in part for some of the poor memories about which people brag or complain. Because one learns language at the level of the physical universe and action within it, he could be said to do with his thoughts what he has been compelled to do with the matter, energy, space, and time in his environment. Thus, if these have been forced upon him and he did not want them, after a while he will begin to reject the thoughts concerning these objects. But if these objects, spaces, and times and actions are forced upon him consistently enough, he will at length go into an apathy about them. He will not want them very much, but he thinks he has to accept them. Later on, in school, his whole livelihood seems to depend on whether or not he can remember the knowledge which is forced upon him. The physical universe level of remembering, then, is retaining matter, energy, space, and time. To improve the memory, it is only necessary to rehabilitate the individual's choice of acceptance of the material universe. In answering these questions, particular attention should be paid to the happier incidents. Inevitably, many unhappy incidents will flick through, but where selection is possible, happy or analytical incidents should be stressed. This list does not pertain to asking you to remember times when you remembered. It pertains to acquiring things which you wanted to acquire. Can you remember a time when 1. You acquired something you wanted? 2. You threw away something you didn't want? 3. You abandoned something you knew you were supposed to have? 4. You did something else with the time which was otherwise appointed for you? 5. You went into a space you were not supposed to occupy? 6. You left the place you were supposed to be? 7. You were happy to have acquired something you couldn't afford? 8. You happily defied directions you had been given? 9. You were sent to one place and chose to go to another? 10. You chose your own clothing? 11. You wore something in spite of what people would think? Can you remember a time when 12. You got rid of something which bored you? 13. You were glad to have choice over one of 2 objects? 14. You didn't drink any more than you wanted to? 15. You successfully refused to eat? 16. You did what you pleased with yourself? 17. You did what you pleased with a smaller person? 18. You were right not to have accepted something? 19. You gave away a present you had received? 20. You destroyed an object somebody forced upon you? 21. You had something you wanted and maintained it well? 22. You maliciously scuffed your shoes? Can you remember a time when 23. You didn't read the book you had been given? 24. You refused to be owned? 25. You changed somebody's orders? 26. You slept where you pleased? 27. You refused to bathe? 28. You spoiled some clothing and were cheerful about it? 29. You got what you wanted? 30. You got back something you had lost? 31. You got the person you wanted? 32. You refused a partner? 33. You threw the blankets off the bed? 34. You had your own way? 35. You found you had been right in refusing it? List 6. Forgetter section. It is generally conceded that the opposite of to remember is to forget. People can easily become confused between these two things so that they forget what they think they should remember and remember what they think they should forget. The basic and underlying confusion between forget and remember has to do evidently with what has been done to the individual on a physical level, and what has been forced on him or taken away from him in terms of matter, energy, space, and time. The word forget rests for its definition on the action of leaving something alone. How would a deaf-mute teach a child to forget something? He would, of course, have to hide it or consistently take it away from a child until the child went into apathy about it and would have nothing further to do with it. If he did this enough so that the child would abandon the object, a child could be said to have forgotten the object, since the child, or any person, will do with his thoughts what he has done with the matter, energy, space, time, and organisms around him, thoughts being an approximation in symbological form of the physical universe. If a child has been forcefully made to leave alone or abandon objects, energy, spaces, and times, later on when he hears the word forget, this means he must abandon a certain thought. And if he is in apathy concerning the forced loss of objects or having them taken away from him in childhood, he will proceed to forget them very thoroughly. It could be said that an individual will occlude as many thoughts as he has had to leave alone or lose objects in life. Pain itself is a loss, being uniformly accompanied by the loss of cells of the body. Thus, the loss of objects or organisms by the individual can be misconstrued as being painful. Memories, then, can be called painful, which actually contain no physical pain. But the individual must have had physical pain in order to understand that the loss means pain. Punishment often accompanies in child training the times when the child is supposed to leave something alone. Thus, having to leave something alone is equivalent to being painful. Thus, to remember something one is supposed to forget could be erroneously judged to be painful, and indeed it is not. There is a whole philosophy in existence that the best thing to do with unpleasant thoughts is to forget them. This is based securely upon an apathy occasioned by early training. A child, when asking for an object, will usually at first be cheerful, and when he does not procure it, will become angry. If he still does not procure it, he may cry, and at last goes into apathy concerning it and says that he does not want it. This is one of the derivations of the Dianetic tone scale and can be observed by anyone. These questions, then, are an effort to overcome the times when one has had to leave things alone, when one has had to lose things, and when the loss has been enforced. Thus, when answering these questions, it would be very well to try to find several incidents for each, particularly a very early incident. Can you recall an incident when 1. You put something aside because you thought it was dangerous, but it wasn't. 2. You acquired something you were not supposed to have and kept it. 3. You cheerfully got into everything you were supposed to leave alone. 4. You went back to something you had been pulled away from. 5. You found the caution to leave something alone groundless. 6. You cheerfully destroyed an expensive object. 7. You threw away something you wanted. 8. You played with somebody you were supposed to leave alone. 9. You were right in disobeying. 10. You read a forbidden book. 11. You enjoyed having things. Can you recall an incident when 12. You acquired a dangerous object and enjoyed it. 13. You stole some food and were cheerful about it. 14. You ate exactly what you pleased. 15. You fixed some electrical wiring successfully. 16. You played with fire. 17. You successfully drove dangerously. 18. You touched something in spite of all warnings. 19. You got away with it. 20. She walked out on you. 21. You and some friends collected objects. 22. You touched a forbidden thing happily. 23. You got it anyway. Can you recall an incident when 24. You went where you weren't supposed to and enjoyed it. 25. You owned something that was once forbidden. 26. He walked out on you. 27. You threw away something you had had to accept. 28. You found something which had been hidden from you. 29. You acquired a habit you weren't supposed to have and enjoyed it. 30. You were right and they were wrong. 31. You enjoyed yourself in a forbidden space. 32. You weren't supposed to do it, and you did. 33. People were glad they had been wrong about you. Can you recall an incident when 34. You recovered something somebody had thrown away? 35. You bullied somebody into giving you something you wanted. 36. You kept on with this processing despite what was said. 37. You persisted in doing something until they agreed you had a right to. 38. You suddenly realized you could do anything you wanted with an object. 39. You did something dangerous and got away with it. 40. Your group finally got something they had been denied. 41. You found you didn't have to sit there anymore. 42. You realized you didn't have to go to school ever again. 43. You realized it was recess. Can you recall an incident when 44. You played hooky? 45. You made something look like something else. 46. You found where an adult had made a mistake. 47. You discovered it wasn't what they said it was. 48. You found yourself master of all of your possessions. 49. You discovered you didn't necessarily have to go to sleep at night. 50. Although you felt you had to eat it, you left it alone. 51. You ate something that wasn't good for you and enjoyed it. 52. You let yourself get mad and were glad of it. 53. You suddenly decided you couldn't be that bad. Can you recall an incident when 54. You opened a forbidden door? 55. You made it go very fast when it should have gone slow. 56. You stole some time. 57. You found some love you didn't know was there. 58. You abandoned somebody and were glad of it. 59. You refused to leave that time alone. 60. You sneaked off and built a fire. 61. You didn't realize it could be that good. 62. You found out it wasn't bad to play. 63. You couldn't see what was wrong with pleasure. 64. You left off doing something you were supposed to do something you enjoyed. Can you recall an incident when 65. You acquired a space you once wouldn't have had? 66. You indulged yourself thoroughly. 67. They couldn't keep you back from it. 68. You successfully refused to come to the table. 69. You got burned anyway and didn't care. 70. You got rid of an object and acquired liberty. List 7. Survival factors. In that the basic drive of life is survival, and in that good survival must contain an abundance, the survival characteristics of people, organisms, matter, energy, space, and time, from the viewpoint of an individual, are very important. The incentive toward survival is the acquisition of pleasure. The thrust away from death is the threat of pain. High ideals and ethics enhance the potentialities of the individual and the group in surviving. The ultimate in survival is immortality. The factors which make up life can become contradictory in that one item can, in itself, assist survival and inhibit survival. A knife, for instance, is pro-survival in the hand, but contra-survival when pointed at the breast by somebody else. As a person advances in life, he becomes confused as to the survival value of certain persons, various objects, energy, space, and time. The individual desires survival for himself, for his family, for his children, for his group, for life in general and the physical universe. Confusing one thing with another and beholding an item which was once survival become non-survival, beholding non-survival entities taking on survival qualities, the ability of the individual to evaluate his environment in terms of whether it assists or inhibits survival deteriorates. An individual, a family, a group best survives, of course, when pro-survival entities are in proximity and available, and when contra-survival entities are absent. The struggle of life could be said to be the procurement of pro-survival factors and the annihilation, destruction, banishment of contra-survival factors. Emotion is directly regulated by pro-survival and contra-survival factors in life. When an individual procures and has in his proximity a strong survival entity, such as another person or animal or object, he is happy. As this pro-survival entity departs from him, his emotional reaction deteriorates in direct ratio to his belief in his ability to recover it. As it threatens to depart, he becomes antagonistic and fights to keep it near him. If its departure seems certain, he will become angry, and lest it become pro-survival for another life form and he is assured he has lost it, he will even destroy it. When he realizes what his own state may be, or the state of his family, children, or group, with his pro-survival entity departed, he experiences fear that its loss will be permanent. When he recognizes what he believes to be a nearly irretrievable absence of this pro-survival entity, he experiences grief. When it is considered to be lost permanently, he experiences apathy, and in apathy he may even go to the point of saying he did not want it. Actually, from antagonism on down the tone scale of emotion all the way to grief, he is still fighting to get it back, and only in apathy abandons it and negates against it. In the case of a person, animal, object, energy, space, or time which threatens the survival of an individual, his family, his children, or his group, the best survival can be accomplished when such an entity has been banished or destroyed, or is as distant as possible from the individual, his family, his children, or his group. In the case of the mad dog, the greatest danger exists when he is nearest, and the greatest safety exists when he is most distant or absent. With contra-survival objects, then, we have the tone scale in reverse. When the contra-survival object is present and cannot be put away, the individual experiences apathy. When the individual believes himself to be threatened, or when he feels his family, his children, or his group are threatened by a contra-survival object to a point where he cannot easily repel it, grief is experienced. For grief contains some hope of victory through enlisting the sympathy of one's allies. When a contra-survival entity is threatening to approach, fear is experienced, providing one feels that a direct attack is not possible. If the contra-survival object is near, but the individual, his family, his children, or his group feel that it can be conquered even though it is already too close, anger results. If a contra-survival entity might possibly approach, antagonism is demonstrated. Above this level, contra-survival objects may be more and more distant or easily handled, up to the point where the individual can even be cheerful about them, at which time they are either absent or can be handled with ease. Individuals get into a fixed emotional state about their environment when contra-survival objects remain too statically in their environment, or when pro-survival objects are too difficult to obtain and cannot be procured or brought near or seem inclined to leave. Mixed with these emotional states is the confusion occasioned by a dulled ability to differentiate between the pro- and contra-survival of an entity. A parent is contra-survival in that he punishes, is much too big, and cannot be contributed to, which lessens the survival potentialities of a child. On the other hand, the same parent furnishing food, clothing, and shelter, and also, but not least, being an entity which loves and can be loved, is a pro-survival entity. The parent entirely absent, then, is not a satisfactory survival state. The parent present is not a satisfactory survival state. Hence, an indecision results, and the individual demonstrates anxiety toward the parent. But this anxiety exists because of many hidden situations extending back to the beginning of an individual's life. The following questions are designed so as to permit the individual to reevaluate the pro-survival and contra-survival nature of persons, animals, objects, energies, space, and time in general. Can you recall a time when 1. A person you disliked was about? 2. An individual you liked stood above you? 3. You finally accepted a person you liked? 4. You enjoyed accompanying a person you liked? 5. You were against a person you liked? 6. You acquired an individual you liked? 7. You and a person you liked engaged in a pleasant action? 8. Your action resulted in getting rid of somebody you didn't like? 9. You enjoyed seeing somebody you admired. 10. You advanced toward a person you liked. 11. You acquired an object which you adored. Can you recall a time when 12. You knew somebody felt affection for you? 13. You got away from a person of whom you were afraid. 14. You walked after a person you liked. 15. A person you liked aided you. 16. You and people you liked were all together. 17. You almost met somebody you disliked. 18. You were glad to be alone. 19. Somebody aided your ambition. 20. You were among people you liked. 21. You found somebody amiable. 22. A person amused you. 23. You finally didn't have to be anxious. Can you recall a time when 24. A person you liked appeared suddenly? 25. You had a good appetite. 26. You approached somebody you honored. 27. Somebody approved of you. 28. A person you liked arose. 29. You were arrested by somebody's beauty. 30. You enjoyed an arrival. 31. You found out you didn't have to be ashamed. 32. Somebody you liked was asleep. 33. You assailed an enemy successfully. 34. A person you honored assisted you. 35. You enjoyed an associate. 36. You felt assured by a person you liked. Can you recall a time when 37. You were astonished to find out somebody respected you after all? 38. You attacked somebody you didn't like. 39. You were attached to a friend. 40. Somebody you liked gave you attention. 41. You were attractive to somebody. 42. You were awakened by somebody of whom you were fond. 43. You were glad to find somebody was bad. 44. You played ball. 45. You played a battle with children. 46. Somebody considered you beautiful. 47. You discovered you had become fond of someone. 48. Somebody you disliked begged you. Can you recall a time when 49. You began a friendship? 50. You discovered you didn't have to behave. 51. A person you disliked was behind you. 52. You were below somebody you liked. 53. Somebody of whom you were fond bested you. 54. You were beside your favorite friend. 55. You discovered you were liked better than you thought. 56. You were between two friends. 57. You bit somebody you disliked. 58. You decided to be blind to a fault. 59. You liked somebody who was of another race. 60. Somebody asked you to blow hard. Can you recall a time when 61. Somebody's question made you blush pleasantly? 62. Somebody made you feel bold. 63. You were glad somebody had been born. 64. Nobody could bother you. 65. You had reached the bottom and started up. 66. You bowed to a friend. 67. You were in a box with a pleasant person. 68. You broke bread with somebody you liked. 69. You breakfasted with somebody you liked. 70. You liked somebody so much you could hardly breathe. 71. You brought somebody a present. Can you recall a time when 72. You brushed against somebody you liked? 73. Somebody helped you build something. 74. Somebody kissed a burn. 75. You were so happy you felt you would burst. 76. You buried something you didn't want. 77. You were too busy to see an enemy. 78. You stood by somebody. 79. You saw something you disliked in a cage. 80. You answered a call from a friend. 81. You broke a cane. 82. You captured an enemy. 83. You no longer had to be careful. Can you recall a time when, 84, you found somebody cared? 85. You enjoyed being careless. 86. A cat you didn't like walked away from you. 87. You discovered you weren't the cause. 88. They couldn't catch you, and you realized it. 89. You were certain of a friend. 90. You discovered you had charm. 91. You enjoyed a child. 92. You found a church pleasant. 93. You discovered there were friends in the city. 94. You and others left the classroom. 95. Somebody believed you clever. 96. You found an enemy was clumsy. Can you recall a time when, 97. You didn't have to clothe yourself as directed. 98. You threw away a collar. 99. You didn't have to comb your hair. 100. You were comfortable with a person. 101. You saw an enemy coming and didn't meet him. 102. You could come as you pleased. 103. An enemy had to obey your command. 104. You found you were in command. 105. You heard an enemy was committed. 106. You were in good company. 107. You took compassion on an enemy. 108. You were discovered to be a good companion. Can you recall a time when, 109, you felt complete? 110. You concealed yourself from an enemy. 111. You condemned an enemy. 112. People had confidence in you. 113. You confounded an enemy. 114. You conquered an enemy physically. 115. Somebody consented. 116. You couldn't contain yourself. 117. You saw an enemy contract. 118. You proved very contrary. 119. It was hard to count your friends. 120. People realized you had courage. 121. Your courting was successful. Can you recall a time when, 122, you put a cover over an enemy? 123. You made an enemy crawl. 124. You created a group. 125. You made somebody get over being cross. 126. You were glad to be in a crowd. 127. You made an enemy cry. 128. You cured a friend. 129. An enemy cut himself. 130. You lost an enemy in the dark. 131. You discovered something you didn't like was dead. 132. You turned a deaf ear to an enemy. 133. You forgave somebody for deceiving you. Can you recall a time when, 134, you threw somebody you didn't like into dejection? 135. You delayed a catastrophe. 136. Somebody was delighted with you. 137. You could not deny a favor. 138. You could not deny what you wanted. 139. You overlooked a defect in a friend. 140. You were depended upon. 141. An enemy got what he deserved. 142. Your desire was answered. 143. You departed from an enemy. 144. An enemy departed from you. 145. You drove an enemy into despair. 146. You and another successfully reached a destination. Can you recall a time when, 147, your group destroyed an enemy? 148. Your determination won. 149. You could tell the difference. 150. You diminished an enemy. 151. You dispersed a group you didn't like. 152. You found you were right to distrust somebody. 153. You dived in. 154. There was plenty to divide. 155. You had no doubt of someone. 156. You drove somebody. 157. You and a friendly person ate. 158. Your effort was rewarded. 159. You were enclosed by friends. Can you recall a time when 160. You successfully encouraged somebody? 161. You put an end to something you didn't like. 162. You enjoyed watching somebody leave. 163. You knew you'd had enough and took action. 164. Somebody was entranced with you. 165. You were equal to anyone. 166. You escaped from an enemy. 167. You got even with somebody you didn't like. 168. You passed an examination in spite of somebody. 169. You were excited by an arrival. 170. Somebody you didn't like escaped from you. Can you recall a time when 171. Somebody you disliked went far away. 172. You discovered a person had been faithful. 173. You discovered you didn't have to be afraid anymore. 174. You fed somebody. 175. You discovered your enemies were few. 176. You found somebody you had been looking for. 177. You decided to stick to the finish. 178. Your first enemy went away from you. 179. You watched a detested person flee. 180. You forbade somebody to come near you and were obeyed. 181. You used force on somebody successfully. 182. You realized you were free. Can you recall a time when 183. You knew you had a friend? 184. You frightened somebody you didn't like. 185. You gathered friends together. 186. You could go outside the gate. 187. People found you generous. 188. You no longer had to be on your guard. 189. People made you happy. 190. You harmed a person you didn't like. 191. Somebody you liked hastened to you. 192. You healed a friend. 193. You helped an ally. 194. You had a friend. 195. You hindered an enemy. Can you recall a time when 196. Somebody tossed you up high? 197. You put an enemy in the hole. 198. You agreed it was hot. 199. You hunted an enemy. 200. You hurried toward a group. 201. You hurt somebody you needed. 202. You coaxed somebody into being idle. 203. You illuminated a group. 204. You discovered you had imagined a wrong about someone. 205. You and a friend did the impossible. 206. Somebody you had hunted walked in. 207. You found an enemy ignorant. 208. You made somebody you didn't like impatient. 209. You were discovered to be interesting. Can you recall a time when 210. Your invention was appreciated? 211. You took a pleasant journey. 212. You made somebody joyful. 213. You jumped. 214. You kept somebody from doing wrong. 215. You saw an enemy kicked out. 216. You overcame a desire to kill. 217. Somebody found you were kind. 218. You were first kissed. 219. You landed on your feet. 220. You were late and it didn't matter. 221. You made people laugh. 222. You and a person you liked were lazy. Can you recall a time when 223. You left an enemy? 224. There was one less. 225. You caught an enemy in a lie. 226. You and your group enjoyed life. 227. You were glad it was light. 228. You were happy to listen. 229. You overcame somebody bigger than you. 230. You made somebody glad to be alive. 231. You found love really existed. 232. Your luck was excellent. 233. You fixed a machine for somebody. 234. You received pleasant mail. 235. You knew a good man. Can you recall a time when 236. Somebody imitated your manner? 237. You had an enemy under your control. 238. You decided not to marry. 239. You found you were the master. 240. You discovered you weren't mean. 241. You had a happy meeting. 242. You were in the midst of friends. 243. A person you didn't like minded you. 244. A friend interested you with music. 245. People found you mysterious. 246. You discovered nobody disliked you. 247. You could make all the noise you pleased. 248. You didn't have to obey. 249. You obliged somebody. Can you recall a time when 250. You discovered you had not been observed after all? 251. You made it a gala occasion. 252. You offended somebody you didn't like. 253. You sat on somebody. 254. You shut the door on an enemy. 255. You disobeyed an order and found it was all right. 256. You organized a game. 257. You were glad to participate. 258. You were happy in a partner. 259. You took somebody's part. 260. Somebody experienced passion for you. 261. You were patient with a foolish person. 262. You brought peace. Can you recall a time when 263. You felt pity for an enemy? 264. You were impolite and it served your purpose. 265. You found you weren't poor. 266. You took position beside a friend. 267. You felt powerful in your friends. 268. You found somebody was precious to you. 269. You did what you preferred to do with a person. 270. You gave somebody you liked a present. 271. You prevented somebody from doing something foolish. 272. Somebody thought you were pretty. 273. You found you didn't want to see somebody go to prison. Can you recall a time when 274. You were right in standing by your principles? 275. You were part of a procession. 276. They discovered you could produce. 277. You and a friend made progress. 278. Somebody was true to a promise. 279. Proof wasn't necessary. 280. Somebody was proud of you. 281. You stayed with your purpose. 282. You were discovered to be of good quality. 283. You stopped a quarrel. 284. You found you could act quickly. 285. It was unnecessary to be quiet. 286. You lifted a child. Can you recall a time when 287. You discovered enmity was rare. 288. Somebody read to you. 289. There was danger and you were ready. 290. Somebody unexpectedly reappeared. 291. You received somebody you liked. 292. You recognized a friend. 293. Somebody took refuge in you. 294. You discovered your regrets were in vain. 295. People rejoiced with you. 296. A friend rejoined you. 297. A person decided to remain. 298. You were considered remarkable. 299. You repeated something and weren't sorry for it. Can you recall a time when 300 people found you had been wrongly represented? 301. Somebody said you resembled somebody. 302. You found you didn't have to respect somebody. 303. You restored a friendship. 304. You retained goodwill. 305. You revealed trickery. 306. A friend rubbed against you. 307. You tried to save somebody you disliked from ruin. 308. You made an unfriendly person run. 309. You cured somebody's sadness. 310. You discovered safety. 311. You knew you were part of a pretty scene. Can you recall a time when 312. You were right in claiming somebody was a scoundrel. 313. You made an unfriendly person scream. 314. You were happy to find somebody wasn't what he seemed. 315. You found you didn't think about yourself all the time after all. 316. You sent somebody away. 317. You found a person wasn't as severe as you had thought. 318. You made somebody shake. 319. You shouted with joy. 320. You enjoyed shutting something up. 321. You had a friend at your side. 322. You enjoyed the sight of a person leaving. Can you recall a time when 323. You forced silence. 324. You found your size didn't matter. 325. Somebody found you were skillful. 326. You were glad you had been slow. 327. You succeeded in putting a puzzle together. 328. You were glad something was slippery. 329. You were glad you came too soon. 330. Somebody was sore at you and it didn't do any good. 331. You tied somebody to a stake. 332. You enjoyed startling somebody. 333. You found you didn't have to starve. 334. You didn't want to stay and didn't. 335. Somebody stuck to you. Can you recall a time when 336. Somebody was still your friend. 337. Somebody stirred you. 338. You stopped over to talk to somebody. 339. You stopped an unfriendly person. 340. Somebody you liked in a store was good to you. 341. Somebody made you feel less strong. 342. You stripped an unfriendly person. 343. Somebody stroked you. 344. Somebody discovered how strong you were. 345. You won a struggle. 346. You subdued an unkind person. 347. You found you had a subject. 348. You made an unfriendly person submit. 349. You succeeded in spite of people. Can you recall a time when 350. You made a person suffer with justice. 351. You gave another person a suit. 352. You felt sure in the presence of somebody. 353. You handled somebody well. 354. You seized an unfriendly person. 355. Your search was rewarded. 356. Somebody tried to send you away, and you didn't go. 357. You found you had taken somebody too seriously. 358. You watched an unfriendly person move fast. 359. You found shame wasn't necessary. 360. Somebody discovered they had suspected you wrongly. Can you recall a time when 361. You should have told, and you did. 362. Your anxiety was for nothing. 363. You apprehended an unfriendly person. 364. You were glad somebody was tall. 365. Your tears were followed by relief. 366. You terrified an unfriendly person. 367. They had to admit you hadn't stolen it after all. 368. Somebody had to respect your rights of ownership. 369. You tried an unfriendly person out. 370. You got together with an unfriendly person and won. 371. You treated many people. 372. You were glad it was true. Can you recall a time when 373. You found it was all right to be under someone? 374. You discovered you weren't an unhappy person. 375. You discovered the difference between no, N-O, and no, K-N-O-W. 376. You lifted up a child. 377. You enjoyed going upstairs with somebody. 378. You were found to be useful. 379. Something you thought was rare turned out to be usual. 380. You discovered it was all right to be vain. 381. They discovered how valuable you were. 382. You found something wasn't a vice. 383. You recovered your vigor. Can you recall a time when 384. You overcame a violent person? 385. You found you had no invisible enemies. 386. You made a dog wag his tail. 387. You really earned the wages you were paid. 388. You made an enemy wait. 389. You walked with somebody you liked. 390. You backed an unfriendly person up against a wall. 391. You wandered happily. 392. Somebody found you were warm. 393. You found it was all right to watch. 394. You discovered you were not weak. 395. You made an unfriendly person weep. Can you recall a time when 396. You did not care where he went? 397. You were happy to watch somebody go. 398. You physically compelled somebody to come. 399. You had a good opinion of a wife. 400. You had a good opinion of a husband. 401. You discovered it wasn't wrong. 402. You did something wrong and it turned out all right. 403. You were complimented on writing. 404. You made somebody yell. 405. Pleasant objects were against you. 406. You were glad an object was about. 407. Objects were all about you and you were happy. Can you recall a time when 408. You were glad an object was above you. 409. Somebody accepted an object you wanted to give. 410. One object accompanied another. 411. You acquired an object you wanted. 412. You got action out of objects. 413. Somebody admired something you had. 414. An object advanced you. 415. You found an object adorned you. 416. You discovered affection for something you had not known you liked. 417. You threw something away of which you were afraid. 418. You ran after an object and caught it. 419. Something aided you. Can you recall a time when 420. You were glad to get rid of all of something. 421. An object almost injured you, but you were all right. 422. You attained an ambition for something. 423. You were among pleasant objects. 424. You found an animal was amiable. 425. You amused somebody with an object. 426. You were anxious about something and got rid of it. 427. A dangerous object approached and you got it away. 428. Somebody approved of something. 429. You arrested an object. 430. You were glad to be a rival of an object. Can you recall a time when 431. You were happy a car came. 432. You found you hadn't been ashamed without cause. 433. You put an animal to sleep. 434. You assailed something victoriously. 435. You assisted somebody with something. 436. You stopped associating with something you didn't like. 437. An object gave you assurance. 438. You astonished people with something. 439. You attacked something successfully. 440. You attracted an object. 441. You threw a ball up. 442. You considered something beautiful. Can you recall a time when 443. Somebody begged you for something? 444. You made a machine behave. 445. You were glad you were behind something. 446. You were happy to be below something. 447. You didn't believe in an object. 448. You were between two objects. 449. You blew something out. 450. You scraped bottom. 451. You acquired bread. 452. You polished an object. 453. You burned something you didn't want. 454. You buried something you disliked. Can you recall a time when 455. You captured something? 456. You did something skillful with a car. 457. You found out you didn't have to be careful with an object. 458. You were successfully careless. 459. You charmed somebody with something. 460. You became certain about something. 461. You took care of some possession because you wanted to. 462. You saw something coming in time. 463. You exerted your command over an object. 464. You concealed something. 465. You condemned an object. 466. You gave somebody something and it gave them confidence. Can you recall a time when 467. You resolved an object which had confounded you. 468. You conquered an object. 469. Something was given away with your consent. 470. You constructed something well. 471. You arranged something that was very convenient. 472. You showed courage about an object. 473. You cut something you didn't want. 474. You got rid of an unwanted object. 475. You delayed a physical action. 476. An item gave you delight. 477. You denied something existed. 478. You depended on an object. Can you recall a time when 479. You were happy to receive something you deserved? 480. You watched an unwanted object depart. 481. You took delight in destroying something. 482. You saw the difference between two objects. 483. You watched an object diminish. 484. You did something which others considered too difficult. 485. You were happy to dig. 486. You dispersed many objects. 487. You mastered something you distrusted. 488. You did what you pleased with something. 489. You understood an object you had doubted. 490. You drew something to you. Can you recall a time when 491. You gave an animal a drink? 492. You watched an object drop. 493. You dwelled in a pleasant place. 494. You waited eagerly. 495. Something looked too good to eat. 496. You succeeded in moving an object after a great deal of effort. 497. You enclosed an object. 498. Something encouraged you. 499. You made an end to an object. 500. You found an object considered an enemy was really a friend. 501. You enjoyed possessing something. 502. You felt you couldn't get enough of something. 503. You cut an entrance. Can you recall a time when 504. You escaped from an object? 505. You successfully examined something dangerous. 506. You were excited by something. 507. You exercised an animal. 508. You turned an object on its face. 509. An object was faithful. 510. You threw something far from you. 511. You made something go fast. 512. You overcame the fear of an object. 513. You fed an animal. 514. You took the first thing that came to you without qualms. 515. You made an object fit. 516. You watched somebody flee from an object and then approached it. Can you recall a time when 517. You owned something you had been forbidden to touch? 518. You successfully applied force. 519. You were proud of your possessions. 520. An object was a friend. 521. You frightened somebody with an object. 522. You happily gathered objects together. 523. You made something grow. 524. You were generous with objects. 525. You guarded something well. 526. An item made you very happy. 527. You were glad to do something harmful with an object. 528. You healed an animal. Can you recall a time when 529. You helped somebody with an object. 530. You found something somebody had hidden from you. 531. You hindered something bad. 532. You put a hole through an object. 533. You made an object very hot. 534. You hunted successfully. 535. You hurried to get something you wanted and achieved it. 536. You made an object hurt an enemy. 537. An object let you be idle. 538. You made something illuminate something. 539. You imagined a new object and made it. 540. You did the impossible with an object. Can you recall a time when 541. You watched something come in. 542. You increased your possessions. 543. Out of your own choice, you took one object instead of another. 544. An object held your interest. 545. Somebody was happy with your invention. 546. You killed something bad. 547. You made an object jump. 548. You found that something was really yours. 549. You kissed an object out of happiness. 550. It was good that an object came too late. 551. You made somebody laugh with an object. Can you recall a time when 552. You took the length and breadth of an object. 553. You found an object lying. 554. You gave something life. 555. You lighted up a space well. 556. You were glad something was little. 557. You loved an object and kept it. 558. You managed a machine another couldn't manage. 559. You controlled an object. 560. You made an object make music. 561. You wrested a secret from some mysterious object. 562. You were glad to be mean to an object. 563. You mastered an intricate item. Can you recall a time when 564. You watched the meeting of two objects. 565. You threw fluid up into the air. 566. You heated a fluid. 567. You poured a fluid out. 568. You mixed two fluids. 569. You stirred a fluid. 570. You found something wasn't necessary. 571. You made an animal obey you. 572. You obliged somebody with an object. 573. You bought something for an occasion. 574. You shut up an object. 575. You organized a number of items well. Can you recall a time when 576. You discovered the origin of something? 577. You inflicted pain with an object and were glad to do so. 578. You put an object in your pocket. 579. An object made you feel rich. 580. You gave somebody something which was precious. 581. You prepared a mixture which was successful. 582. You preferred one object to the other. 583. You prevented harm from coming to an object. 584. You won a quarrel about an object. 585. You collected rain. 586. you acquired a fluid you wanted. Can you recall a time when 587, you raised an object? 588, you maintained something rare. 589, you were glad to receive something. 590, you recognized an object that puzzled others. 591, you gave an animal refuge. 592, you controlled an animal. 593, you restored an object. 594, you let somebody retain something valuable. 595, you made something run where others had failed. 596, you took an object to safety. 597, you put an object into something. 598, you took an object out of something. Can you recall a time when 599, you acquired something that was scarce? 600, you repaired a scratch on an object. 601, you made somebody scream with an object. 602, someone found they had been too severe about an object. 603, you shook fluid off something. 604, you pulled an animal out of water. 605, you acquired an animal for food. 606, you tied an animal to a stake. 607, you struggled successfully with an object. 608, you stroked an object. 609, you were too strong for an object. 610, something was submitted to you as a tribute. Can you recall a time when 611, people discovered you were to be congratulated about an object? 612, you handled an object well. 613, you seized an object. 614, your search for an object was rewarded. 615, you were glad to see an object. 616, you maintained something. 617, you overcame something which had threatened you. 618, you stopped an object from being noisy. 619, you convinced someone of the value of an object. 620, you squandered some money. 621, you acquired some money. 622, you refused some money you didn't have coming. Can you recall a time when 623, you watched an unwanted object go? 624, you watched a desired object come. 625, you made something fly. 626, you left a space you didn't like. 627, you acquired a space you wanted. 628, you admired an area. 629, you advanced through space. 630, you felt affection for a space. 631, you were against a space. 632, you decorated a space. 633, you were glad to get out of a space of which you were afraid. 634, you aided in making space. 635, you were pleasantly alone in space. Can you recall a time when 636, you were in an amusing space? 637, you conquered a distance. 638, you got through an unwholesome space. 639, you arrived in a pleasant space. 640, you opened up a space. 641, you gave another assurance about a space. 642, you were attracted to a space. 643, you awakened in a pleasant place. 644, you burned off a space. 645, you blindly but successfully got through an area. 646, you enjoyed a black space. 647, you made a box. 648, you went into a pleasant place. Can you recall a time when 649, you took something out of a place? 650, you filled a place full. 651. You enjoyed a box. 652. You let a space be occupied. 653. You broke into a forbidden space. 654. You made a good cage. 655. You captured an area. 656. You took a child out of a place. 657. You straightened up a space. 658. You liked jumping through space. 659. You went below in space. 660. You made a broad space. 661. You collected many things in a place. 662. You created heat. Can you recall a time when 663. You brought a light? 664. You extinguished unfriendly energy. 665. You lit a light. 666. You regulated fire. 667. You successfully applied energy. 668. You burned something you didn't want. 669. You arranged lighting well. 670. You boiled something. 671. You made a machine run. 672. You dissipated heat. 673. You chilled something. 674. You went from a dark place into a friendly lighted one. 675. You were glad it was dark. Can you recall a time when 676. You left darkness behind you? 677. You were happy with the sunrise. 678. You watched twilight fade. 679. You saw lighted windows. 680. You found something with a light. 681. You were glad to enter a warm place. 682. You made a cold place warm. 683. You warmed somebody. 684. You heated something to eat. 685. You found companionship in fire. 686. You found somebody was warm against you. 687. You were glad to leave a cold place. 688. You made a barren place pleasant. Can you recall a time when 689. You found someone waiting for you in a dark place and were glad? 690. You regulated time well. 691. You left a bad time behind you. 692. You approached a good time. 693. You decided that things had not been so bad. 694. You found your time well spent. 695. You utilized some time yesterday. 696. You enjoyed a time today. List 8. Imagination. One of the most important parts of the thinking process is imagination. Imagination is actually a form of computation. Imagination gives calculated and instinctive solutions for the future. If an imagination is dulled, one's computation is seriously handicapped. Imagination is a good thing, not a bad thing. With daydreaming, for instance, a person can convert a not-too-pleasant existence into something livable. Only with imagination can one postulate future goals to attain. If you take the word imagination apart, you will discover that it means merely the postulating of images or the assembly of perceptions into creations as you desire them. Imagination is something one does of his free will. Delusion could be said to be something forced upon one by his aberrations. All one has to know about imagination is know when he is imagining and when he is not. Can you recall a time when 1. You foresaw how something should be and so arranged it? 2. You imagined something and constructed it. 3. You envisioned how a place would look and went there. 4. You were forced to admit you lied when you had told the truth. 5. Somebody disarranged what was yours and you put it back. 6. You delighted in filling up space with imaginary things. 7. You did a masterpiece of creation. 8. You saw something come into actuality which you had imagined. 9. You imagined it was there and destroyed it. 10. Your vision was complimented. Can you recall a time when 11. You planned what to do with some time and did it. 12. You ignored interruptions and went on according to schedule. 13. You saw how some space could be bettered and bettered it. 14. You drew a plan and people followed it. 15. Things were smoother because you had thought of them that way. 16. You made profit out of imagination. List 9. Valences. You may have noticed, as you were perceiving things which have occurred in the past, that you were sometimes apparently inside your own body, and sometimes may have been observing yourself. There are people who are never out of their own body in recall, and people who are never in it. There are many valences in everyone. By a valence is meant an actual or a shadow personality. One's own valence is his actual personality. Be assured, however, he can get into a confusion with other bodies and persons. If one is in one's own valence when he is recalling things, he sees what he has seen just as though he were looking at it again with his own eyes. This is a very desirable condition of affairs. The symptom of being out of one's own valence and in a shadow valence might be said to mean that one finds his own body too dangerous to occupy in thought. Being out of valence makes perceptions hard to contact and recall. You will find as you continue these lists, repeating each one over and over, that it becomes easier and easier to see things again out of one's own eyes. In the following list of questions and in any recall, one should make an effort to take the viewpoint of himself, which is to say, to see the scene and get the perceptions as he himself got them at the time. Can you recall a time when 1. You watched a person you didn't like doing something you liked to do? 2. You saw a person you liked doing something you didn't like to do? 3. You watched a person you liked doing something you liked to do? 4. You saw a person you disliked doing something you disliked to do? 5. You noticed somebody wearing something you wore? 6. You found somebody using a mannerism you used? 7. You adopted a mannerism? 8. You found yourself and a dog being treated alike? 9. You made faces at yourself in the mirror? 10. You decided to be completely different from a person? Can you recall a time when 11. You discovered you were like an object? 12. You were classified with an unfavorable person? 13. You were classified with a favorable person? 14. You found yourself dressed like many others? 15. You found you were different from somebody after all? 16. You noticed the difference between yourself and others? 17. You ate with somebody you liked? 18. You met a person who reminded you of another and noticed the difference between them? 19. You walked in step with somebody you liked? 20. You rode with somebody you admired? 21. You had to take the same position as somebody else? Can you recall a time when 22. You played a game with people you liked? 23. You found yourself doing something because somebody in your early youth did it? 24. You found yourself refusing to do something because somebody in your early youth did it? Note that the word like is used to mean admire or feel affection for, and also to be similar to. The effort of valences could be said to mean trying to be like one's friends and unlike one's enemies. Unfortunately, in life one often has comparisons and similarities between himself and his enemies, and has dissimilarities pointed out between himself and his friends. The adjustment of this is desirable, so that one feels free to follow through any motion or action of any human being without associating the motion or action with either friend or enemy. As an effort to straighten out one's associations and disassociations regarding people, the following questions are appended as the second part of List 9. Recall 1. A person who looks like you. 2. A person who has physical troubles similar to yours. Recall 3. A person from whom you got a particular mannerism. 4. A person who reminds you of an animal you knew. 5. A person who compared you unfavorably to unfavorable persons. 6. A person who compared you favorably to favorable persons. 7. 2 people whom you had confused with each other. 8. A person you knew long ago, like a person you are living with. 9. A person whom you knew earlier who reminds you of a person with whom you are now connected. 10. Who you are most like. Who said so? 11. Who used to be afraid of sentiment. 12. Who didn't like to eat. 13. Who was never supposed to amount to anything. 14. Who associated with people too much. Recall 15. Who made life miserable for everybody. 16. Who had bad manners. 17. Who did you know earlier that had the pain that bothers you? 18. Who would you most want to be like? 19. Who would you most hate to be like? 20. Who held that you amounted to nothing? 21. Who tried to keep you in line? 22. Who flattered you? 23. Who fed you? It would be a good idea to go back over the last half of List 9 and recall specific incidents with all possible perceptions which illustrate the answers to these questions. List 10. Interruptions. Slowness or uncertainty of speech, stage fright in part, slowness of computation, which is to say thinking, and hesitancy in taking directions, stem mainly from being interrupted in physical actions during early youth. The child, because he may bring danger upon himself, is continually interrupted in his physical actions. He reaches for something and is turned away from it, not simply by words, but by being himself removed from the object or having the object removed from him. He is kept out of spaces he wishes to enter by being pulled back. He is given one thing when he wants another. His self-determinism is thus continually interrupted in his efforts to explore, obtain, or get rid of matter, energy, space, or time. From these early interruptions, the child builds up a long chain of experiences of interruption, not simply by speech, but by barriers and obstacles in the physical universe. If he has not been thoroughly interrupted when a child, he can analytically assess later interruptions. But if he has been handled and denied so as to interrupt him when he is young, his power of decision is inhibited, to say nothing of his power of speech and thought. Recalling special incidents, as requested in this list, brings them into the light and takes the power from these chains of interruptions. Can you recall a time when 1. An object resisted you and you overcame it? 2. You couldn't move and then succeeded in getting away? 3. Somebody took something out of your hands and finished it? 4. Your physical action was interrupted? 5. A machine did not start? 6. Somebody jumped at you unexpectedly? 7. You were told a ghost story? 8. You had to give up a career? 9. Somebody touched your mouth? 10. You tried to raise your hand and were blocked? 11. You found the road was closed? 12. You couldn't get something into something? Can you recall a time when 13. You were halted by a friend? 14. Your father showed you how it was really done? 15. Somebody made you take care of something? 16. It was demonstrated you were putting it to the wrong use? 17. You were corrected for your own good? 18. You knew somebody who had a mania for using only the right word? 19. You were helped by having your sentence finished? 20. You couldn't go at the last minute? 21. You knew somebody who corrected the words you used for songs? 22. You weren't permitted to cry? 23. Noise got on somebody's nerves? Can you recall a time when 24. You couldn't finish it for want of time. 25. You had to be patient. 26. You couldn't go just then. 27. You were going, but you were stopped. 28. Somebody tried to stop you, but you kept on anyway. 29. You used it just as you pleased. 30. You had not been halted. 31. You got loose and continued. 32. You yelled anyway. 33. You completed it despite somebody. 34. You had to stop bolting your food. 35. You drank all you pleased. 36. You weren't supposed to fight. 37. Somebody checked a muscular reaction. Can you recall a time when 38. You were very enthusiastic and somebody cooled it quickly? 39. You went on in spite of weariness. 40. You broke a habit. 41. You found somebody wasn't as strong as you had supposed. 42. You discovered you could have it after all. 43. You found the real motive was selfishness. 44. You got out from under domination. 45. You discovered it wasn't for your own good after all. 46. You stopped yourself from interrupting somebody. 47. You found other people weren't wiser than you. 48. Everybody thought you were wrong, but discovered you had been right. Can you recall a time when 49. You attained the goal anyway. 50. You discovered another person wasn't worth having. 51. You restrained an urge to destroy something. 52. You disobeyed the law and got away with it. 53. Lightning didn't strike you. 54. You fixed something. 55. You ignored an interruption to your reading. List 11. Invalidation section. Aberrated individuals use two distinct and very aberrated methods of controlling others. The first consists of forcing the other person to do exactly what is desired with the mechanism of recrimination and denial of friendship or support unless instant compliance takes place. In other words, you do exactly what I say or I am no ally of yours. This is outright domination. Additionally, it seeks by anger and outright criticism, accusations, and other mechanisms to pound another individual into submission by making him less. The second method might be called domination by nullification. This is covert, and quite often the person upon whom it is exerted remains unsuspecting beyond the fact that he knows he is very unhappy. This is the coward's method of domination. The person using it feels that he is less than the individual upon whom he is using it, and has not the honesty or fortitude to admit the fact to himself. He then begins, much as termites gnaw away a foundation, as in California, to pull the other individual down to size, using small, carping criticisms. The one who is seeking to dominate strikes heavily at the point of pride and capability of his target. And yet, if at any moment the target challenges the nullifier, the person using the mechanism claims he is doing so solely out of assistance and friendship, or disavows completely that it has been done. Of the two methods, the latter is far more damaging. A person using this method seeks to reduce another individual down to a point where he can be completely controlled and will not stop until he has reduced the target into a confused apathy. The lowest common denominator of nullification could be called invalidation. The nullifier seeks to invalidate not only the person, but the skills and knowledge of his target. The possessions of the target are said to be not quite as important as they might be. The experiences of the person being nullified are minimized. The target's looks, strength, physical capabilities, and potentialities are also invalidated. All this may be done so covertly that it appears to be in the best interest of the target. The nullifier seeks to improve the person being invalidated. The first question of this list should be, of course, how many people have you known who have sought consistently, under the mask of seeking to aid you, to tear you apart as a person and reduce your future, your hopes, your goals, and the very energy of your life? Can you recall a time when 1. A person much smaller than you resented your size. 2. A person bigger than you made you feel inferior. 3. A person would not let you finish something. 4. An object was too much for you. 5. You found a space too big. 6. You were pushed back because you were too small. 7. You didn't make the team. 8. You found you were adequate. 9. You found somebody had lied about how bad you were. 10. You discovered you had been right after all. 11. You found your decision would have been best. Can you recall a time when 12. You solved a problem nobody else could do. 13. You discovered there were homelier people in the world than you. 14. You found you could ignore somebody's opinion. 15. You found somebody else thought you really had done something good. 16. You were admired for your looks. 17. You overcame a machine. 18. You accomplished an arduous journey. 19. You discovered somebody who slurred you was dishonest in other ways. 20. You found you were bigger and more powerful than an animal. 21. You discovered your competence. 22. You bested somebody thoroughly. Can you recall a time when 23. An enemy cried for quarter. 24. You drew blood on somebody else. 25. You took the lion's share and kept it. 26. You made your weight felt. 27. You were too heavy for somebody. 28. You killed something. 29. You won. 30. You were able to get away from somebody who invalidated you. 31. You discovered you were right and the old man was wrong. 32. You found you could get better. 33. You got well when they had no hope for you. 34. You surprised yourself with your own endurance. Can you recall a time when 35. You discovered you did understand. 36. You did a job nobody believed possible. 37. You were proud of yourself today. List 12. The elements. Man's primary foe in his environment is the weather. Houses, stoves, clothes, and even food, in the degree that it furnishes body warmth and mobility, are weapons of defense against storm, cold, heat, and night. Can you recall a time when 1. You bested a storm. 2. You enjoyed thunder. 3. You had fun in snow. 4. You enjoyed the sunshine. 5. Everyone else said it was too hot, but you enjoyed it. 6. You bested an area of water. 7. The rain was soothing. Can you recall a time when 8. You were glad it was a cloudy day. 9. The wind excited you. 10. The night was soft. 11. You were glad to see the sun. 12. The weather was friendly. 13. You bested some surf. 14. The air was exhilarating. 15. You were glad of the season. 16. You got warm after being too cold. 17. A dawn excited you. 18. You felt you owned the stars. 19. You were excited over a hailstone. 20. You discovered the pattern of snowflakes. 21. The dew was bright. Can you recall a time when 22. A soft fog rolled. 23. You won over a storm's violence. 24. It was terrible outside, and you were snug in your house. 25. The wind felt good. 26. You lived through it. 27. You discovered you liked your own climate. 28. You were glad to see spring. 29. You felt you could best the winds of the world. 30. You admired a storm. 31. You enjoyed lightning. Begin at list 1 again and go through all lists once more until book has been used many times. Special session lists. If recalling a certain thing made you uncomfortable. It may be, as you recall certain incidents in your life, that you are rendered uncomfortable. There are several ways of overcoming this. Physical pain. If actual physical pain is part of the situation you have recalled, do not try to force yourself further into it, but concentrate on later incidents which gradually get you back up to present time. These questions will assist you to do that. 1. Recall a pleasant incident which happened later. 2. Recall what you were doing this time last year. 3. Recall a moment when you were really enjoying yourself. 4. Recall what you were doing this time last month. 5. Recall what you were doing yesterday. 6. Recall something pleasant that happened today. Recall all these things consecutively once again. Sorrow. If no physical pain was included, but sorrow was, recall the following. 1. The next time after that, you acquired something you liked. 2. Recall something you have now which you enjoy. 3. Recall something you wanted a long time and finally got. 4. Recall the time somebody was very nice to you. 5. Recall the last money you got. 6. Recall eating dinner last night. 7. Recall eating today. Recall all of these incidents over again with all available perceptics. If you consistently hit physical pain and grief incidents in your processing and do not seem to be able to do anything about it, call your local Dianetic auditor and arrange a professional visit so that you can be brought up to a point where the list is a benefit. Wanting to avoid recollections. If you merely became uncomfortable without great sorrow or physical pain, but simply wanted to avoid the recollection, use the following list. 1. Recall the incident again in its entirety from first to last. 2. Recall the incident once more. 3. Recall an earlier incident similar to it. 4. Recall an even earlier incident similar to it. 5. Recall the earliest incident that you can get like it. 6. Recall all these incidents one after the other in their entirety. 7. Recall all the incidents again one after the other from the earliest to the latest. 8. Recall all these incidents again. 9. Go over the chain of similar incidents and find later ones on up to present time. 10. Recall a pleasant incident which has happened in the last few days. Get all possible perceptics on it. 11. Recall what you were doing an hour ago. Stabilization. This usually stabilizes any of the above conditions. 1. Recall a time which really seems real to you. 2. Recall a time when you felt real affinity from someone. 3. Recall a time when someone was in good communication with you. 4. Recall a time when you felt deep affinity for somebody else. 5. Recall a time when you knew you were really communicating to somebody. 6. Recall a time when several people agreed with you completely. 7. Recall a time when you were in agreement with somebody else. 8. Recall a time within the last 2 days when you felt affectionate. 9. Recall a time in the last 2 days when somebody felt affection for you. 10. Recall a time in the last 2 days when you were in good communication with someone. 11. Recall a time in the last 2 days which really seems real to you. 12. Recall a time in the last 2 days when you were in good communication with people. Recall several incidents of each kind. According to the practice of medicine and after experiment, it has been found that B1 is necessary in large amounts during processing. A good protein diet and some 100 to 200 milligrams per day of B1 have been found to materially assist processing. Failure to take B1 and to use a heavy protein diet have been found to result in nightmares and nervousness when one is undergoing processing. Note that this is a medical finding dating back many years and is not original with Dianetics. Special Session Lists. End of session list. Each time you give yourself a session of processing, you should finish off with the following routine without disc. 1. Rapidly sketch over the session just ended. 2. Sketch over what you have been doing again with particular attention to how you have been sitting. 3. Go over the period of the session with regard only to what you have been doing with your hands and things in the exterior world you have heard during this session. 4. Fix your attention upon a pleasant object near you now. Repeat this until you feel refreshed in your immediate surroundings.